After entering a house full of monsters, he took over her body and cursed her brother. He started working in the palace, and when he couldn't control his curse, he tied himself up. But Ray went to him and asked him, saying, "Come closer to me, Ray. Please, Ray. Let me go. Free me. Please." Did you change your mind at that moment? But Ray said to him, "You know that's not true. I'm just worried about you, Cloudin." And here, Cloudin started to move in an attempt to break his chains. And here, Ray said to him, "Cloudin, stop moving." And she approached him, saying, "You're going to hurt yourself. Cloudin, please." Then she said to him in tension, "What can I do? How can I help you?" And here, Cloudin looked at her shyly. And here, Ray understood and said to him, "Do you mean that?" And she did it. And Cloudin started to say to her, "Ray, hurry up." And here she felt shy and said to herself, "Am I doing this right? I can't look into his eyes. But I've never seen Cloudin like this before." And Cloudin looked at her and said, "Ray, I like it. Hurry up." And Ray did it. And suddenly Cloudin approached her and kissed her. Then she pulled away from him and said to him, "I'm sorry, I'm going to wash my hands." And Cloudin said, "Don't leave." And Ray shyly said to him, "I'm not leaving, I'm just—" And here Cloudin was sweating even more and looked at her and said, "Ray, open your legs." And she what? Hear Cloudin say, "You're nervous, aren't you?" Ray, "No." Cloudin, "Don't be shy, Ray. I know the expressions you show when you ask for something. Do you think I don't know you? Look at yourself now. Miserable to hide something under your dress." Ray said shyly, "I'm not nervous, but you can't even show it to me, Ray. It's not that I can't." And here, Cloudin smiled and said to her, "So can you show it to me?" And Ray did it, and then said to him, "Is this enough?" And Cloudin smiled and said to her, "I can't see you, Ray. Open them wider." And Ray, "Stop lying. Maybe it's your vision, Cloudin. Stop moaning and open them wider." And Ray, "Stop it, Cloudin. I'm feeling embarrassed." And here Cloudin tried again to break his chains. And Ray screamed at him and said, "Cloudin, what are you doing? Stop!" And Cloudin managed to break his chains, and Ray felt scared. At the time, Cloudin looked at his hands, then looked at her and smiled. And here, Ray fell to the ground in fear. And Cloudin went to her and said, "Where do you think you're going?" And he grabbed her and said, "Stop running away from me, Ray." And she looked at him shyly and said, "Did you do that on purpose? To test me? Is that why you acted like you couldn't get out of those chains?" And Cloudin, "Didn't you like my acting? It seems your body is telling me the opposite. Not because I'm excited. You're not wet and you're not excited." And Ray started crying and said, "No." And here Cloudin lifted her up and said to her, "Why are you crying?" Then he kissed her and said, "Is it because you're embarrassed? Because you hate me? Or because you love me?" And Ray was in shock from his words. And Cloudin, "Why aren't you answering me?" Cloudin asked her, "Do you love me?" And Ray started trembling and said, "What are you—" He waited. And Cloudin did it. And here Ray screamed in pain and said, "It's too big." And Cloudin continued. Then he kissed her and said, "You're fine." And Ray, "Why do you keep going deeper?" And Cloudin, "Because you keep moving." And Ray, "Because I'm trying to get it out of me." And Cloudin, "That's why I'm coming forward. Do you still love me?" And Ray looked at him in astonishment and then said to him, "Yes, no matter who I am." And Cloudin, "I don't care." And Ray, "You didn't mind that I can't read either, Cloudin." And Cloudin, "That's nothing." And here Ray kissed him. Then she said to him, "It's not a thing." And here she remembered when her brother Hayes insulted her and said to her, "Idiot." And here she hugged him happily and said, "You have no idea how happy that made me." Cloudin looked at her shyly and continued what he was doing. Then he said to her, "Ray, I love you." And here Ray, in astonishment, said to him, "I'm not dreaming, am I?" And Cloudin, "You heard me." And Ray, "Can you say it again?" And Cloudin, Ray, I'm not going to hold back anymore. And you will have to surrender yourself to me completely. And Ray, you're too fast. And if you don't, I will never be satisfied. And he kissed her and then said to her, and I don't care if I'm going to break you. And he kissed her gently and said, I love you. And here Ray put her hands on his face and started laughing and said, don't ever change. And Cloudin continued what he was doing and said, yes, I promise you. And the next day, with a bright new morning, Ray went out and said happily, the weather is so beautiful today. Then she started laughing and said to herself, they prepared everything for me when I said I was going out. And then the servant said, get rid of anything dangerous. And Mary did. Prepare snacks. Then Ray looked at the flowers and said, wow, they're all so beautiful. And here, when she saw the gardener, she said to him, hello, Mr. Gardener. It's been raining a lot lately, and I'm sure the flowers could use some sunshine. But the gardener didn't say a word. And here Ray looked at him in surprise and said, he really doesn't talk much, but I feel strangely at ease when I'm with him. And suddenly she put her face to the ground in sadness and said, especially since there's been a lot going on lately. And she remembered her brother and the answer he sent her. And Cloudin, who was tied up, said to her, I'm afraid to lose you because of my mistake. And here she smiled and said to him, I can help too. And at the same time she said to herself, what does he mean when he says he's afraid to lose me? Does Cloudin still have something to hide from me? And she started watering the flowers and said to herself, I'm still worried even after I heard him say he loves me, and I still barely know anything about Cloudin in this castle. What is he trying to hide from me? I wish he could just tell me. And here she was surprised that the gardener gave her a flower. And she said, oh, this is it. And here he said to her, this flower means happiness. And here she looked at him in astonishment and said to herself, worried about my troubled expression. And she started looking at the flower and said to herself, it doesn't matter if this place is strange. There are kind people here who care about me. Then she smiled and said to the gardener, do you know the name of this flower? But suddenly the gardener stood up, looking at something in fear, sweating. And it was clear that he was looking at Cloudin, who was looking at him in anger. And here Cloudin said to Ray, I was wondering where you were going. And Ray, Cloudin. And she went to him and said, what's wrong? And Cloudin, in anger, you're asking what's wrong? And here Cloudin looked at her shoes and said to her for a silly reason, you didn't even wear the shoes I bought you. And yet you're smiling at a wilted flower. If you're so happy with those old worn-out shoes, you can happily get rid of everything else. And Ray said in tension, that's not the reason. I wanted to keep them as long as possible. But Cloudin pushed her hands away and said, I don't care. Then he said, Philip. And he said, yes. And here he looked at the gardener angrily and said, get him out of here. And here the gardener felt tense because he was cursed, and if he left the castle he would die. And here Ray screamed at Cloudin, is it because of my shoes? I just thought it would be embarrassing to wear the shoes anywhere and the soles are worn out. I understand you're upset, but this is going too far. And Cloudin, what about the flower? And Ray, he just gave me this flower to make me happy. Don't tell me that's why you're angry. And Cloudin, so what if it was? What's wrong with that? And here Ray said in anger, all he did was give me a flower and it was just consideration, that's all. And here Cloudin smiled and said to her, I'm sorry I can't be as considerate. Is that why you wanted to break up with us? Then he left. And here Ray said to him, Cloudin, that's not what I meant. But Cloudin didn't answer her and said to Philip, I told you to get rid of him, Philip. And at dinner, Cloudin yelled at Mary. And she said, yes, sir. And here Cloudin said to her, tell Philip that I know he's hiding that stutterer in the barn, so he'd better take care of it before I do something. And here Ray said to him, Cloudin, why do you have to go this far? I don't understand why you're so angry. I've already told you that the gardener is not wrong. And here Cloudin looked at her angrily and said to her, So what if he's not guilty? You're going to hide him in your room. And here Ray looked at him angrily. Then she said, I'm going. I can't bear to sit here and eat with you. And she left quickly. But the maid Mary went after her and said, Lady Mary, wait a minute. And she grabbed her and said, Lady Ray, calm down. And Ray, let me go, Mary. I don't understand why Cloudin is making such a fuss about something so trivial. And she was angry as she said, I told him there was nothing to worry about. But he keeps finding something to blame me for. It's infuriating. But Mary grabbed her again and said, He's just jealous. He's so crazy in love with you that even something trivial like this makes him jealous. And it's normal for lovers to fight. But Ray said to her in anger, If he was jealous, he could just say so. That's how he is with everything.